Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are going to get started. Welcome to Every Book Counts. Every book is a mental health book. This morning/afternoon session will focus on using children's literature to promote mental health. And you can go to the next slide, Jessica. This webinar is being brought to you by Reading is Fundamental, the nation's leading children's literacy nonprofit. Our mission is simple to encourage children to discover a joy of reading, and we do that by putting books into the hands of children. To date, in our 60 years, we've put 430 million books into the hands of children nationwide. And I am very excited to introduce to you my dear friend, Jessica Jones-White. Jessica and I formerly worked together at the Inspired Teaching Demonstration School, where she is currently the assistant principal of middle school. So you know that is a big job with a lot of challenges, particularly as we are getting into May and it is the end of the school year. And then Jessica, I know you also have a lot of other titles as a clinician, but I don't want to mess up all the letters. So if you want to share, I'll turn it over to you.
I'm a practicing psychotherapist as a LGPC. I work at Infinity Mental Health, which is a practice in Maryland. And I also do education consulting through the Creation Gym, who is also co-sponsoring this today. And so those are like my hats, my official hats. Now, what's in the closet? We won't break that all out, but I have lots of hats too.
Thank you, Jessica. I know there are a ton of letters. They're all clinical, so I'm going to mess it up if I try it myself. So appreciate that.
Yes. Okay, well, let's get started on our webinar today. I always want to see who's out there and get a vibe from our participants. So my first question for you all is, how have books supported your mental health? Like, in what ways has it already been a tool for regulating yourself, escaping from the world, or even for your children, family, and friends? So what you'll do is you'll use the QR code to go to the Padlet and to respond. And I'll have our Padlet up so we can start seeing some responses pop up. We'll take a few moments to respond to the Padlet. While you do that, I'll model how you can respond. You put your little thing in here, your subject, and then you can write your response. All right, so I'll give you guys some time to finish putting some response in, but we know what the data says about how books help our mental health. So books help us process our emotions. They are sometimes a cathartic experience where you can relate to a character in the book or even maybe a setting in the book if the book is set in your hometown or a place that you've visited. It can help with acceptance, especially when we're processing tough emotions or going through new things, having changes in our lives. It can help with coping, getting used to a new rhythm or getting used to a new realization or something maybe changing about your life experience that didn't happen before, maybe new family members or less family members. Naming emotions and understanding what our body is feeling at the time, not just happy, mad, sad, but expressing deeper understanding of emotions. What's the difference between happy and joy, and how has a book helped me learn that? You might feel seen or represented, and that is very helpful, especially for kids, to be able to see themselves in the text. They're able to engage much deeper, and it always helps when you can relate to something as far as understanding. You can also put some of your responses in the chat if you don't want to toggle to the Padlet as well. The chat is open. You may feel reduced feelings of isolation or loneliness. Sometimes books are friends. Help you to build empathy for yourself and others, and give some language to things that you may be experiencing in your life. So these are some ways that we know books help our mental health. But there are also really concrete ways books help our mental health, and that's some of the things that we're going to talk about today. How can I use books as a processing tool, as a way to help kids have understanding of other people's experiences in a formalized way that you feel confident using in your classroom or in your home? First, let's learn about a little bit more about why we say every book's a mental health book. So, according to the National Literacy Trust, reading is a vital support tool. 59% of children use it to relax, and 46% of them say that it helps them to feel happy. 27% report that it helps them deal with problems. It helps them process challenges. And almost 30% of them also say that it helps to boost their confidence. So we know that it's going to give kids some what of a pathway to be able to show up the way they want to show up and to help them relax and have a better mood. There was a study that psychological medicine published that said that students who are engaged in pleasure reading and reading for pleasure between ages 2 and 9, so that's going to be that early childhood development period and the beginning of elementary school, perform better on cognitive tasks and have a better mental well-being in their adolescence. So it's setting kids up for the future of having a positive self-identity and having better mental health. So we're putting a foundation down through books for, positive wellness in the future. Kids who read for pleasure are 3 times more likely to have a higher mental well-being and less likely to get a diagnosis of different experiences of depression. And then the last thing I wanted to add here is 2 and 3 young children use digital escape reading as a digital escape. So if you're trying to figure out, well, how do I get these kids off the screen? How do I get them to engage more with other tasks and activities? 2 and 3 kids are saying they love books to help them escape. Often the challenge is finding a book that really speaks to the child and that they want to read and get engaged in and that they feel that they're reading for pleasure. That's like the key there. So, bibliotherapy is a type of therapy that clinicians use to help clients and patients process their feelings, emotions, and experiences in a clinical setting. But what we don't realize is, as teachers and as parents, we're doing bibliotherapy all the time. So, there's different types of bibliotherapy, but the definition is the therapeutic use of literature to help patients understand perspective and find hope. There are 2 different types of bibliotherapy, and we distinguish between those two by setting. So there is developmental, which is used in community educational settings to help process life changes. It's used by teachers, nurses, people who do not practice medicine or counseling, but in those non-traditional medical settings. So anything that's not a medical setting. So you're doing bibliotherapy in your classroom all the time, just may not have had a name for it. And then there's clinical bibliotherapy that happens in clinical spaces that helps them process different diagnoses, but it has been very powerful for anxiety, PTSD, and processing grief. And then, so inside of the developmental and clinical range, people have started to research a lot more, and they're starting to come out with a new classification of bibliotherapy, which is called classroom bibliotherapy, and it's a tier 1 social emotional learning intervention. And as the years go on, when classrooms catch up with research, you might find that there are going to be some concrete curriculums coming out with bibliotherapy woven in and using some of the empirical things that we have found that work specifically for the classroom for bibliotherapy. So today, you're going to learn more about how to turnkey bibliotherapy in your classroom using a lesson plan guide that teaches you how to do that, and maybe reframe or redesign, spruce up things that you are already doing in your read aloud, class novel, book club practices in your classroom. All right, so there's pretty much 3 basic therapeutic stages that happen in a bibliotherapy experience. The first is identification, where the reader really connects with the character and is able to see themselves in the character or understand the realistic expression of their life. Even if it's a fiction character, often, even when you think about fantasy, there's some part of it that has a realistic expression that's relatable to a person's life, so they can identify with that person or with a scenario or scene. The next stage is catharsis, when you have a real deep emotional connection to something that you're reading and you release that through your story experience. And so that's usually an internal process, but sometimes you can see that externally with your students' emotions or how they may come to you and have conversations with how they relate it to something they read that day. And the last stage of therapeutic experiences during bibliotherapy is insight. So, when you walk away with a new understanding about life or situation, when you come out of your experience saying, oh, I have thought about this a different way, or I may have a different way to approach this problem because I learned it from this character. That's going to be when we reach that final stage of insight. All of these stages of bibliotherapy help to clinically, they have seen that it reduces anxiety and depression, both the developmental style bibliotherapy and the clinical style. And then the last thing I'll say about bibliotherapy is there's also something called books on prescription. So I'm not sure if you've ever heard that from one of your students or families or friends, but you can always also prescribe books as a way to help process feelings and emotions. And so for you all, that might be saying, hey, come to the class library, look at a book with me. I really think you'll like this story, and maybe you'll connect with one of those characters. Social stories are another way that we see formally being able to help students by way of books. So, Social Stories is a trademark type of story by Carol Gray. She was an educator. And what it is personalized narratives that accurately describe a context, skill, achievement, or concept. And there's 10 specific criteria for a social story. It has to be focused on descriptive statements to answers. So, does the story answer questions about something? Is there a who, what, when, where, why, and a how? And does it allow the person to leave with a new skill or a new conceptual understanding? Social stories are often used in ABA therapy, clinical spaces, classrooms, and different interventions to help children and students, really relate to something. So you might see a social story about washing hands and germs, or you may see a social story about going to bed at night because it's hard and scary. Um, these are structured narratives that really help kids have a catharsis experience, but leave with a conceptual understanding of how to process or cope or manage a situation. Social stories have been extremely effective in helping to identify emotions, increase coping skills, reduce anxiety, and improve executive functioning overall. And that's something that I know is like a buzzword in the classroom a lot. Like, my student has poor executive functioning. How do I help them keep up with their supplies? How do I help them realize that there's only 5 minutes left in class? Those type of things, there are definitely social stories available for how to pace things, what tools do you have at your disposal for executive functioning that may be able to help them see themselves in the action of doing the things that are going to help them be more organized or be more on task. So the social story is all about helping them like actualize and visualize for themselves how they too can use the skills that the character did in their own lives. Um, and then uh in the classroom just in general, you have SEL read-alouds, right? So you guys most classrooms in some format, especially the ELA classrooms and the elementary school classrooms, are doing some type of read aloud, whether it's a small blurb from a text that's longer or a full picture book. Often in these spaces, this is another form of bibliotherapy. You're addressing these concepts in the morning in your morning meetings and helping kids process maybe bullying or self-esteem and, social skills. There was a lot of research that was conducted to show that reading enhances achievement in four specific pathways when it's done in the classroom in the format of a read aloud. It helps to improve emotional regulation. It helps to increase intrinsic motivation. And it also helps to strengthen peer and teacher-student relationships, whether it's peer-to-peer or teacher-to-student. Those relationships are strengthened by having read-alouds in the classroom that speak to some of these topics. The other thing it does is foster long-term reading behaviors. So students who experience read-alouds in the classroom are more likely to have long-term reading behaviors. And as we saw earlier, the long-term reading behaviors are more likely to lead to wellness. So all of these things kind of connect. We're building a foundation and a practice of reading and choosing texts that we connect with, that we can see ourselves in, and emotionally process things to build a pathway for later in our life without a book. And I'm just having a moment. I know I can remember that character in that story. So it just creates this pathway. Um, Shared reading also, just in general, reading the same text with another individual also has its benefits. And in this read aloud format, you're having a shared reading with all your classmates. This allows for deeper discussions around life experiences and also helps create a lot of normalcy around what kids might be experiencing. So I might feel like I'm the only one who thinks there's monsters under my bed at night. Like, this is my experience. It's not, I feel a little awkward about telling my friends that I'm afraid of the dark. But then we read a read aloud in class where there's a character who's afraid of the dark and he thinks there's monsters under his bed at night. And I realize, oh, half of my class also feels this way. It creates those connections that may not happen in just regular conversations. So that's another way that these are read alouds are powerful, but this is all different versions of bibliotherapy. The last type of bibliotherapy we'll talk about is mirror windows books and book talks. So, mirror books are books that reflect a child's own identity, and window books are books that offer a view into another person's world. We have seen in research that the impact of shared reading is massive. A John Hopkins study showed that 10,000 students in Baltimore found that reading the same novel generated productive conversations about really complex topics and things that they were experiencing in their life, like violence and declining mental health in family members and friends. And that shared reading experience had really strong outcomes where kids left that experience with more elevated reports of better mood, processing a different understanding of their life experiences. They showed improvements in higher order thinking. And so I say all that to say, when you do these novel studies and these book talks that have mirrors that allow kids to see themselves, that have windows that allow them to see someone else's perspective, they're profoundly impactful. And a book talk, we have so many different ways to do that, but one of the ways that a lot of teachers use is a Socratic seminar format. And that Socratic seminar format should go through the three stages of bibliotherapy. So when you're doing your Socratic seminar, try to be intentional in having a space where kids are talking about identification, how they relate to the character or how they identify that character. What characterization do they place on the character? Try to have a moment where we talk about catharsis. Like, can anyone relate to a feeling that they saw a character have? Or has anyone seen someone have the feeling this character had? And the last part that you want to include in your Socratic seminar is insight. Just really having kids name some of the understandings that they're walking away with and how they may have changed from reading before they read the book to after. Once you add those elements in there, your Socratic seminar is also bibliotherapy. All right, so we have another moment to respond. You guys can respond in the chat or on the same Padlet. And my question is, how does bibliotherapy and Mirror and Windows books currently support your students or children? So, is there a practice you already have in your classroom that you didn't know you were doing bibliotherapy that you do now know about and feel a little bit more maybe proud of or ready to refine? What's already going on in your class? You can use the QR code to open the Padlet, or you can use the chat. I'll toggle over to the Padlet in a moment to give you guys some time to respond. Yeah, that's definitely a classroom experience we have. Someone said if there's like a lot of tattling or fibbing happening in the classroom, you may could read a social story about that or have a book that concentrates on the impact of that for other people or even for the character in the story. Definitely would be helpful. Yes, I like this. Someone added, if you were the character, would you make the same choice? Why? You can build that into book clubs, ask students their perspective, and figure out if they would make some of the same choices as the characters. Someone else said that books, mirrors and window books, and bibliotherapy is like having a wise friend or a comfort companion. Another person said, I'm a children's book author, and often I'll get inspired by what I see the kids navigating to make new books. Yeah, actually, that's perfect. How did you read this one book and what did you experience? And using that as inspiration for another book. And now that you know more about bibliotherapy, thinking about how you might format those books so that it can be used intentionally in the classroom to, have those three stages happen where kids are having identification, catharsis, and insight. All right, thanks for responding. You guys can keep responding in the Padlet, but we're gonna move forward and learn a little bit more by putting today's knowledge into practice in a lesson. So you will get a link in the chat. I'm about to give you a link in the chat. This is to a guide that I put together to go along with today's webinar. It has two read aloud lesson plans in there, one for the book that we're going to read and experience, and one for another book. These books are both from Lee and Low. Lee and Low has some really great SEL books, and we'll talk more about that collection later. But we're going to walk through the guide a little bit, and then we're going to experience a bibliotherapy lesson. So I have a read aloud lesson guide in this guide for you guys. I also have a book club chapter review. So you want to see, okay, if I'm doing a book club chapter, like, having my kids read a chapter, how's that different than the picture book? What should I do that's a little bit different? All of these things that I'm giving you guys today are based in the Castle standards, and they're also based in empirically proven best practices. The Castle standards are what um, a lot of schools and districts and professionals are using this framework to understand social emotional learning. It stands for the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. They have five parts to these standards. It's self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision making. And all of the lessons in here and the guidance in here is founded, foundationally in that framework, and in addition to how to do bibliotherapy and best empirical practices. Yes, I think there's going to be, I'm looking at the chat to answer some questions. I believe that there's going to be access to the recording, and also I will share out the link to this guide with the recording, and it's also in the chat. And then, yeah, Erin's answering some questions in there too. I also have a trigger warning script. Sometimes teachers ask me, like, okay, we're about to have this really tough conversation. How do I have this tough conversation with my students, but also take into consideration what's happening in their home life and what feels emotionally safe? As we go through the guide, we're going to talk about getting students ready to have a bibliotherapy experience, both opening and closing it out, being mindful of how they feel about those topics. I also included in here, just in case there are some families, a story time guide. So I want to do bibliotherapy in my house with my kids before bed in a story time type of format, or during the day when we're hanging out as a family. There's also a story time guide in there that will help you out. So let's look into the guide. All right, so like I said, for educators, there's four parts, and then for families, there's also a part. And I just want to be clear that books are not therapy in themselves. They are therapeutic, and there's a big difference. And as teachers, as family members, you're not doing therapy with a student. You're not giving a clinical experience. However, you are helping them experience social emotional learning, mental health, and wellness. And so that is why it's coined bibliotherapy. It is often used in many different spaces and not just in the clinical space. So don't worry, like if families are like, oh, are you doing therapy on my child or my student? No, bibliotherapy is not a form of therapy. It has it in the name, but it is just a practice. The developmental style is just a practice. All right. This little space 1.2 is going to tell you a little bit more about the Castle framework if you're not familiar and the trauma informed practice. So I talked to you all a little bit just a moment ago about maybe having a trigger warning or having some pre-conversation about it. There's six principles that we want to kind of base our understanding on how to be safe in the class or in home when dealing with topics that might be hard for kids to process, or even maybe there's going to be some conversations that come up that might be hard to hear or process. And so first we want to establish safety in the classroom. We want everyone to feel like it's an environment where I can share, where I can be vulnerable, and I know that I'm going to be, treated well. I'm not going to be made fun of, and there's some type of sacred practice around making the space safe. So that might just be having them do some mindfulness before they read the book, and we can talk about that as we go through the lesson. There wants to be some trustworthiness. So on your first day of school, maybe not breaking out bibliotherapy. You might want to get to know your class a little bit better, develop some rapport with students, and then get to a place where you all feel, okay, we're starting to have some really good shares during our morning meeting, or kids are really starting to open up with me. I think it's now time that we can put some of these into practice. You want there to also be some good peer relationships and good peer support so that it adds to that feeling of trust and safetiness, but it also allows them to have a person to process with after they read the book when they're like at recess and having fun, like, oh, this is what came up for me about this book. A space for collaboration. So you'll see that when we do the read aloud today, there's going to be times where I'll ask questions or have a pause so that kids can answer questions and that they can be some collaborative experiences of maybe turn and talk and things like that. You want there to be a space of empowerment if possible, and you want it to be culturally, historically, and gender sensitive and accurate. And so those are the six principles that you're going to kind of keep in mind when you're thinking, is what I'm doing safe and going to be a good experience for kids? You also want them to be in the window of tolerance. So the window of tolerance is something that was coined by Dr. Dan Siegels. And he pretty much described that kids are going to be dysregulated in a space, which is hyper aroused, or dysregulated in a hypo aroused space, whether they're shutting down or too activated. When kids are in those spaces, that is not the best or safest space to be vulnerable or talk about tough topics or have hard discussions. You want them to be in their window of tolerance. You want them to be calm and present, able to think and feel, open to discussions, and making meaning from the story. And to kind of create a space of window of tolerance, you want to do some co-regulation before you begin the book. So you may do some 4-7-8 breathing. You may tell kids to shake it out. You may do a one-word check-in, thumbs up, middle down, like how are you feeling today? But just giving us a moment of co-regulation before jumping into the book, especially if you know you're going to do some social emotional work. All right. Here's some trauma-informed language that you can use when you're having these discussions and you really want to open the platform for them to be able to speak. You want to avoid saying things like, raise your hand if you've ever had this experience. Believe it or not, it does give a little bit of pressure to respond. If I keep my hand down, I'm saying I never had this experience. If I put my hand up, I'm telling people things about me I don't want to know. I'm not really ready to answer this question. You want to say instead, some of us might be able to relate to this. Or you might want to say, there's no right or wrong way to feel about this story, but if you're open to sharing how you feel, how do you feel? Some of us might know what it feels like. If anybody wants to share that they know what it feels like, raise your hand. This allows people to have the opportunity to process and share what they want without feeling the pressure of if my hand's up or down, they're going to create some type of judgment about where my hand placement is in the answering of the question. Okay, so that's just a little bit of some trauma-informed language you can use. Now, the big question I always get is, what if they like just close their life story in the middle of class and there's all these kids listening? You can't prevent that, you can't anticipate it, but you can receive it. So what you would do is follow 7 steps. You thank them for trusting you with that information. I'm so happy you felt comfortable sharing. Then you don't ask any more questions. You don't want to ask them to share more. You don't want them to elaborate more. You just receive it. And then you affirm, it takes real courage to share with your peers and your classmates your experience and how you feel. Thank you. So just continuing of the receiving. I hear you. Thank you for doing it. This is brave. This is courageous. And then the follow up. So later, when there's a private moment or time, you check in with them one on one. Hey, I heard what you shared. I'm concerned a little bit about your experience. Are you okay? If there's something maybe that was jarring shared, or I heard what you said. I'm so happy that you feel safe in class. If it's needed, you report it, right? So we're all mandated reporters. If you need to, you follow that protocol with your school counselor or social worker, and then you document it. So today, May 1st, during read aloud at 12 o'clock, Mary Ellen said she could relate to being hit. And so that gives you an opportunity to have that information if something comes about later. And then you care for yourself. There's going to be moments where things come out in the conversation that are hard to process. I've had students who have experienced loss to gun violence, and it was a classmate or a friend. And that might be a moment where you're handling some unexpected disclosure. If that's the case, you want to definitely care for yourself. There even may be moments where kids say really sweet things about your impact on them. Like, oh, I relate to the teacher in the story because that's like how you are. You're my best friend. You may need to go somewhere and sniffle for a little bit about having a great impact on your students. So either way, process your own feelings and care for yourself. All right, so there is a lesson plan template in here that will help you develop a bibliotherapy lesson for read alouds, close reads at your guided reading table, and things like that. You use it to make sure that you're following those steps and that you have some pause points, that intellectual prep for your lesson where you want to be able to pause, know what question you're going to ask, how are you going to probe, and what are you going to say. So you don't feel like you have to say something on the spot, but that you have intentional, planned places to pause to create or enhance the experience. All right. We're gonna get into a experience of a read aloud from a bibliotherapy perspective. We are gonna be doing the read aloud of the book Benji, The Bad Day, and Me. All right, so I'm gonna close this out for right now. Oh, I am so sorry. I think I realized that you guys were not looking at the guide with me. I apologize. It wasn't presenting at the moment, but the guide is here. Hopefully you all were able to follow along on your side. All right, Benji the Bad Day and Me. All right, so I have the book in person. This is a Lee and Low book. And we are going to read it to help us process our emotions today.
Do you mind, Jessica, take this share screen off so we can see it bigger?
Yes.
Okay. And I'll just plug, check out Lee and Low, and this book's read with permissions from Lee and Low.
Thank you. All right. All right, so before we start our book today, I want us to all get our bodies ready because we're going to be talking about some of our feelings. So you can take your hand, shake it out on the side, shake it out down low. Take your hand, shake it out on the side, shake it out down low. Roll your shoulders back, stretch your neck. And then we're going to take a big deep breath and let it out as a sigh. So ready? And we're going to do one more deep breath and let it out as a soft sigh. And the last deep breath, we're going to try to make a silent sigh. All right, good. So we all should be settled in and we're ready for our story time. Before I read, I want to let you know that today's book is going to talk about some hard things. It's going to be about a family member who is having a really bad day. His name is Sam. Sam is having a really, really bad day. And it's the kind of day where everything goes wrong. He just feels like no one is paying attention to him, and his big brother Benji is also having a bad day. So it might remind you of a time where you were having a bad day. It might remind you of some feelings that you've had in the past. If today is already a hard day for you, you can listen from wherever feels safe. So if maybe you want to go to the cozy corner or you want to take a break, just let me or someone else know. So that's how you like model for the kids some of the content preview or like the trigger warning. All right, let's get into Benji and the bad day and me. Think about your worst kind of day. Not your saddest, but the day that was most exhausting, most frustrating. What did your body feel like? Did it feel tight? Did it feel heavy? Did it feel hot? I want you to hold your answer inside. Hold your answer inside, and we'll ask in a moment. All right. This book is by Sally Plah, illustrated by Clint Min. It's dedicated to anyone who has ever had a bad day and for her boys. And it's also dedicated to Mark, Mary, her brother, and her sister who looked after her. At recess, I got yelled at for kicking the fence, and at lunch, they ran out of my favorite pizza, so I didn't eat. And on the bus home, the driver missed my stop, so I had to walk all the way home in the rain. Now I'm hungry, I'm cold, and wet. Grrr. Shh, Mama says as soon as I open the door. Benji's playing in his box. When Benji's in his box, it's because he had a bad day at preschool. When Benji's had a bad day, we tiptoe and we speak softly. When I've had a bad day, no one tiptoes or speaks softly. What do you see in this picture? What does his body language look like? Let's pause. What do you see in Sam right now? You don't have to tell me what happened, but tell me what you see in his body. What does his face look like? What does his posture look like? What is his body saying? This time I would call in a few friends to answer the question. I would build on their answers and affirm it. Yeah, he looks pretty sad. He looks grumpy. He has some frowny eyes. His smile's turned upside down. And he's dripping wet. He's dragging the bag. He looks pretty sad. Benji, Mama and I made the box last summer. Mama cut the window flaps, and Benji and I splashed on the paint. Inside, it's cozy and safe, but only big enough for Benji and his blue blanket. I sure wish I had a box for for days like this. Look at that box. It's a pretty nice quiet space, but he doesn't feel too included. Let's see what happens next. Benji wiggles his fingers at me. Hi, Benji, I say softly. Benji's face appears. Wet Sammy, Benji says. Samuel, says Mom, there's water all over the floor. Take your shoes off this instant. It's not my fault I had to walk all the way home in the rain. Benji's block city is spread all around. Watch your step, Mama says. Benji's been working hard on that. I know. I helped. I start to say, but Mom's phone rings and she turns away. I stick my tongue out at the box and I do my best karate kick. high in the air above Benji's block city. Whoa, it's pretty close to the block city there. This is a moment where I would ask, what do you think's going on so far for Benji? How does he feel? It seems like some of the things he said is he doesn't feel like other people are supporting him the same way that Sammy gets supported. They can't feel like it's fair. We hear Benji say that he wishes he had a box for his bad day, and he wishes that there was space for him inside of the box. And now he's trying to play with his brother, but he's also having a hard time with that. I always wanted to learn karate. Mama says I can't right now because the classes are on Tuesdays, and that's when we have to visit the super happy lady at Benji's clinic downtown. Let's bounce the ball, the super happy lady likes to say. But Benji never does. Let's play a game. But Benji never plays. Meanwhile, I'm told to sit in the waiting room and not bother anyone. What do you think is happening in this scene? Who do you think the super happy lady is? Hmm. I wonder if Benji wishes he could also see the super happy lady. On super happy lady days, we always get back home tired. So Mama will make berry smoothies to help us feel better. Then she'll wrap Benji tight in his blue big blanket, just how he likes it, and tells him, "You're my little burrito." It looks like Benji is getting help, but what about Sammy? I would pause here. If you were Sammy and you had a really bad day, you're helping your brother, you're supporting him, he has a space to regulate, he has a space to feel where he is safe, and you don't have those spaces, how would you feel? Turn and talk to your neighbor and let them know how you would feel if you were having a really bad day, but you weren't getting the help that you needed. And then I would ask as a second question, how would you ask for the help you needed? If you were Sammy, do you have any advice for Sammy? How would he ask for the help that he needs? But today, there are no berry smoothies and no burritos. Today, Mama is busy and Benji is hiding. This day is just plain old rotten. Thump goes the box. It's Benji kicking around in there. "Hey," I say, "come out and I'll teach you karate." But he doesn't. So I go to the kitchen and pour some cereal. When I add the milk, too much gushes out. I'm grumpy, I'm hungry and cold, and now there's milk everywhere. I've had it with this fence kicking and the rain dripping and the milk spilling day. I cry mad, shivery tears, and no one notices. Have you guys ever had a moment where you cried and you really wish somebody would be there for you? Talk to me about it. Have you ever felt sad before? What did you do when you felt sad? Here's a picture of how Sammy feels. Why do you think the illustrator chose to put this picture? What do they want us to feel or understand about Sammy? And what about this one? Why do you think the author put this picture in the illustrator? What did they want us to see? Have you ever felt this way before? And when you do a read aloud like this and you're asking those questions and pausing for answers, you want to make sure you build that time in. Like, don't choose 15 minutes for this read aloud. Like, use it as a full lesson experience so that way kids have authentic time to share out and experience each other and their stories, but also you have time to kind of narrate and process with them as well. Thunk. Benji comes out. He holds his blanket up high and tiptoes through the block city. Benji spreads his blanket flat on the floor. What's he doing? What do you guys think Benji's gonna do? He pulls me down on the fuzzy blueness and makes me lie straight and still. Then he rolls me over. He works hard to wrap me tight. What did Benji do that Sammy really wanted to happen? Yeah, he noticed him and he saw how he was feeling. Now he's taking care of him, just like how Mama takes care of Benji. Have you ever had someone take care of you in a moment that you really needed it? How did it feel to be taken care of? Benji leans over me. His forehead clunks my forehead. His eyes look right into my eyes. You're my little burrito, he says. How do you think Sammy felt the moment he said, "You're my little burrito"? I open the blanket and let Benji in. You're my little brother, I say. And that's how Mama finds us. She asks, "Can I come too?" Whether the day is good, bad, Benji and I will be okay. That's because the two of us are brothers. Side by side is where we are and how we'll always be. Do you have anybody in your life that you feel side by side with? Do you wish you had someone in your life that you feel side by side with? Sammy is looking different. What changed about him? What do you see in his body now? What does his face, his expressions, and his body look like? How is it different from the beginning of the story? What are the things that people did to change Sammy? What are the things that Sammy did to help himself? That's the end of our story. So what you'll see is as we read the book, I injected planned questions on certain pages to help bring attention to body language and expression, which is going to help with emotional intelligence. I also asked questions that help to create catharsis and identification, so being able to relate to Benji or being able to relate to Sammy. I asked questions that will help give insight as to how he could navigate the situation differently or have a different type of day. And the other thing I'll say is Benji, the Bad Day in Me is very much so about emotional regulation, but it also is about isolation, loneliness, and having a different experience than others. You can infer that it is possible that Benji, his brother, has a diagnosis, that he's going to see the super happy lady because he lives life differently than Sammy. You can also infer that Sammy is not having the same experience as Benji, is that he feels like his family is paying more attention to his brother because of having more needs, and is not really understanding or noticing his own needs. This may be a story that could help a student in your class or a child that you might have who has a sibling who has special needs or autism and really doesn't feel as focused on in the home, or expresses to you that maybe they feel a little left out. Like, I don't get to go to the meetings with the super happy lady, too. This is a book that you can use for that as well, outside of emotional regulation. It can also be a story of inclusivity and consideration of the experience of a peer, a family, or a friend who is living with someone who they feel is receiving a different type of a level of attention or experience. Often kids in our class will say, well, how come he gets a break and I don't get a break? You may be able to use a story like this to help them understand that people need different things to regulate themselves or to feel connected to, their own experience. And it's not that we don't want to pay as much attention to you or give you as much, but that people have different needs. And how can we all meet everyone's needs? How can everyone be seen? The same way that Sammy was seen by Benji when he rolled him up like a little burrito. So this story can be used many ways, and I'll be editing the book guide to add the version of the questions that I did. The version of the questions that are in there currently are about neurodivergence and seeing how maybe people were struggling and trying to regulate themselves. And that's a different version of this read aloud and how you could approach it. Overall, the goal is really to try to see what questions can I ask and how can I facilitate a conversation between my students or myself and the reader, or the audience, so that they can have an experience of insight, catharsis, and identification. All right, really quick, I want to also say that in this guide, I'm going to share my screen again. There is a lesson for another book that is a Lee and Low book called Bird. This book is about an experience that a child is having with loss, and also with substance abuse in his family. And so I'm trying to make sure I'm sharing the correct window really quick. All right, there we go. And so I also put a lesson guide in there for this book, Bird. Lee and Low Books also has a social emotional learning collection on their website where you can go see and look at other books that are going to be books that you can shop around to use for other bibliotherapy experiences in your classroom or in your home. There's also a guide that they have that recommends titles by the type of book it is. So if it's an empathy book, or if it's a book on cultural experiences and things like that, they have different categories. Okay, so we have little bit of time for some questions that you may have about today's experience, what we learned about bibliotherapy, how books can help our students and our kids and friends, how books are mental health books, and also what does a read aloud look like with intentional questions that help to trigger insight, catharsis, and identification. So what questions do you have for me?
I see Stacy has a question if there's any lessons for eighth graders. I'm going to quickly put in the chat our middle school wellness resources. But Jessica, if you want to chat about any other resources for eighth graders, I know you are a assistant principal in a middle school, so I'm sure you have many.
Yes. So the guide that I created for you guys can be used for pre-K to eighth grade. So there is a section in the guide that talks about book clubs, and also a lesson plan for a book club chapter reading, and facilitating a chapter lesson conversation or a bibliotherapy type of experience based on a chapter. That's going to be section 7 of the guide. It's a chapter and novel study lesson guide for bibliotherapy. And also, there is, the rest of the guide just speaks generally to how to approach kids at different developmental levels, the trigger warning script, understanding what the CASEL standards are, and how these bibliotherapy lessons incorporate that, as well as things you can do before and after reading to co-regulate. So you can use the chapter book guide that's in here to go over one chapter of a book in a bibliotherapy style. And then, like I was saying a little bit earlier about Socratic Seminar, you can use the Socratic Seminar at the end of a novel or at the end of a chapter to engage students in conversation, what you would do is you would just pick questions to help facilitate the Socratic seminar that targets one of these castle standards. So self-awareness, confidence, relationships, and then try to trigger those three stages: identification, insight, and catharsis. And so you can use the chapter book guide and the middle school wellness collection that was put in the chat. Does that answer your question, Stacy? And if you guys have questions, throw them in the chat. There's also a small part where I talk about whole novel practices where you can use like a character's emotional arc or a vocabulary wall about emotions, an end of novel a reflection for novels as well.
Thank you, Jessica. I don't see any other questions, but I'm sure anyone can reach out to you or reach out to Riff and we can connect to you if they think of anything later. Um, Go ahead and check out the last Padlet question for today, and I will take this time while everyone's typing in the Padlet to say thank you so much, Jessica, for sharing your deep knowledge of mental health and wellness and how it can connect to literature. I always learn so much from you, and it's a joy that we continue to work together, even though we are no longer in the school setting together.
Yes, I always love being connected with you. And thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. I really hope that this helps more kids across, whoever is listening today have better experiences and really learn how to regulate and process emotions. If you have questions directly for me that you want to ask, or even just, I'm having this hard time in my class with these book experiences, I'm happy to help. You can email me at jessica@thecreationgym.com. My email's on the screen. And thanks again, Erin, for everything. Dr. Bailey. I always like want to put the, respect on the name.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you so much, everyone. We hope to see you very soon. Again, we will answer any of the questions that you have, or if you just want to email us at Riff or email Jessica and say hi, we love hearing from you. So take care.
I can put the link in the book for the booklet in here one more time. Sorry, I just saw a chat. There you guys go.
All right. Thank you all so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great weekend. Take care, everyone. Bye.